In this video, we'll be testing the North Face Stormbreak 2-person tent for its ease of setup, spaciousness, rain protection, comfort, and more. Out of the box, this is what I got. The carry bag, the tent body, the poles for the tent, stakes in this smaller carry bag here, and the Rainfly with pre-attached guidelines. Once you sort everything out, you should get 2 long poles, 2 short poles, 10 stakes, and also some setup instructions. Very briefly, here's how to set up the Stormbreak. First, lay the tent body on the ground, then crisscross the 2 long poles over each other, and each end of the poles is to be secured in the 4 corner grommets. Then secure the very top pole clip and the bottom 8 pole clips with 4 leftover clips to be attached later. These clips hold the tent body to the poles and there are no pole sleeves at all. Now, the 2 short poles are to go 90 degrees on top of the long poles, secured by the grommets at the top of the tent. Then clip the remaining 4 pole clips to these short poles. After that, drape the Rainfly over the tent with the single red webbing on the Rainfly matching the red webbing on the tent body. The underside of the Rainfly has grommets at the top to be secured to the tips of the short poles, plus it also has grommets at the bottom to be secured to the tips of the long poles. Then stake down both vestibules plus the widths of the tent, and also guy out the pre-attached guidelines. One thing though, only 10 stakes were provided, but I needed 14, so remember to pack 4 extra ones. Altogether, the entire setup takes about 7.5 minutes. Taking down the Stormbreak is just the opposite of the setup, but it took me slightly longer to pack the whole thing away, so about 7 minutes and 45 seconds. Everything compacted down nicely, but the carry bag was a little bit small, so it took me slightly longer than other tents to pack everything back in. For more details, I have a separate video with loads of instructions and tips to help you set up your tent more easily. The peak height at the center of the Stormbreak 2 comes in at about 43 inches. And if you remembered from the setup, there are 2 short poles that go at the top of the tent. This holds all the tent fabric up nicely, giving me an extended peak height throughout this entire square area at the top. When I measured the heights at the edges of this square, that came in at about 39 inches on all sides, so you do pretty much get the peak height throughout this entire area. From the outside of the tent with the Rainfly, here's exactly what it looks like, and you can see the peak height throughout this entire area at the top. Now, my height is only about 5'3", so this peak height was more than enough for me, and I can sit almost anywhere underneath the extended peak height and still have loads of space above me. If you're wondering, here's what the peak height looks like with a 4-inch sleeping pad in the tent, and here's a 6-inch queen bed, so plenty of space left over. For the base area, I first measured the length of the tent, and that comes in at about 87.5 inches. Then I measured the width, and that comes in at about 49.5 inches. Overall, that's a total base area of about 30 square feet. Now that we know the area, what's the pad sizing like? This is my Xped Megamet Duo 10. It fits perfectly into the Stormbreak 2 with a little bit of leftover space for storing gear on the floor. The Xped is the size of 2 regular pads put together, so no problem fitting it in at all, but the extra width left is only about 6 inches. If you want to fit wider like 25-inch pads, it will be a very snug fit all the way to the edges of the tent. Now, when I tried to inflate an almost queen-size bed, it looks like it fits perfectly, but it actually bulges out the sides of the tent, putting stress on the tent fabric, so I wouldn't recommend doing so. The width of the tent is way too short for something this big. Here's a quick summary of everything you need to know about the pad sizing. Please take note especially of the width of the tent because not everything will fit in nicely. The Stormbreak 2 comes with 2 vestibules, 1 in each length of the tent. Each vestibule has this like trapezium shape, and here are the measurements. Short length of the vestibule, 41.5 inches. Width of the vestibule, 23.5 inches. So on top of the inner tent base area from before, this gives us an extra 10.5 square feet for each vestibule, or a total of 21 square feet for both vestibules. Now, there are 5 different vestibule configurations. This is the first, fully closed. If you want to leave the center flap open, just unzip it and tie up the vestibule flap at the top of the tent using the top toggle here. You can even just open it only halfway if you don't want it fully open, but you still want a little bit of ventilation because there's an extra toggle right here in the middle. Now, there are actually 4 vestibule loops for each vestibule, 2 on each side. If you stick down the other loop instead, this keeps the center flap closed while allowing you to open the two sides, and this gives you a little awning instead. If you don't want the vestibule at all, you can unstake it and unzip it completely, tie the top fabric up, and the side fabric up too, and this is what you get. As for the zippers on the vestibule, there are two of them for each zipper track, one at the bottom and one at the top, and they're SBS branded. But even though they were good quality zippers, they were frankly very annoying because if you try to use one hand to zip it up, it'll keep snagging and snagging over and over again when the zippers get caught on the Rainfly. To have a snag-free experience, I found that you've got to use both your hands, one hand to hold the vestibule fabric away while using the other hand to zip it up. From the inside of the tent as well, you've still got to hold the fabric away with one hand while zipping or unzipping it with your other hand. Kind of a pain really. Under the vestibules, you'll find one door each, so two doors altogether. The size of the doors are pretty big, and each of them measures about 41 by 29 inches. To keep the doors open, there's a pocket beside each door where you can stuff the door fabric into to hold it out of the way. And the pockets are so big you can fit a bunch of other stuff in there too, not just the door fabric. I also really love that the doors unzip almost completely, leaving just this tiny attachment here. So it's like a huge wide-mouthed door, and that makes it easy to get in and out of the tent. This also improves cross-ventilation, which makes the tent so much comfier. Each door has two zippers. These are SBS zippers, so pretty high quality, and the zipping experience was really good with no snags at all. For storage, there are 4 pockets in the tent, one at each corner, so they're easily accessible from the outside if you need to grab anything. They're also extra big, measuring about 18 by 9 inches, because remember in the previous test, these pockets need to hold the door fabric too. There's also a total of 5 loops in the tent. These are all felt loops which can hang lanterns and fans up. It would be nice if a gear loft were provided to make use of all these extra loops, but there isn't one. The Stormbreak has a tub floor that runs all around the entire tent. I measured the height of the tub floor at the lengths, and this came in at about 6 inches. As for the height at the widths, that came in at about 6.5 inches, so very slightly higher. The Stormbreak also has a full coverage Rainfly which extends almost all the way down to the ground. I really love that apart from the vestibules at the front and back of the tent, the widths of the tent have an extra guy out point each where you can pull the Rainfly away from the tent body. This makes for better ventilation because the Rainfly is pulled away from the body all around the tent. This is also great for rain protection since it better shields the rain from the tent, but notice the widths can't be pulled away as much as the vestibules, so that's why the tub floor has to be very slightly higher at the widths. As for seam taping, the only seams in the north face that were taped were the seams on the tub floor, so that's all the seams here in each corner and also the seam running across the floor. Everything else above the tub floor isn't taped. As for the Rainfly, every single seam was taped perfectly, and you can see the outline of the seam taping here. First, I put the North Face Stormbreak through about 2 hours of light to moderate rain, and it held up perfectly fine with no leaks at all. So next, I put it through a heavy rain test. After the heavy rain stopped, I checked in on the tent, and here are the results. After 1 hour of heavy rain, there was not a single drop of water inside the tent at all. I checked all the seams, especially those in the corners, because they tend to be really vulnerable in the heavy rain, and they did not leak during the heavy rain test. Seam taping, good to go. I also checked the rest of the flooring to see if there were any leaks, and I found none. Next, I also lifted the Rainfly to check on the tub floor, and I noticed that the water didn't go beyond the tub floor, so it's a great length to keep you dry on the inside. So tub floor, also good to go. Then I checked the underside of the Rainfly to see if any water seeped through, and it was completely dry. Rainfly, also good to go. Overall, every feature held up well, and the Stormbreak did really great in the heavy rain. Now, if you remove the Rainfly on hot days, here's what the inner tent looks like. I would say that this is about 50% mesh and 50% fabric, so not a lot of mesh for summer use, if that's what you're looking for. It's not too bad when it comes to looking at views, but because of the white fabric square up top, it kind of blocks your view when you're stargazing. As for materials, the flooring is made of 68D polyester with a 3000mm polyurethane coating. The Rainfly is made of 75D polyester with a 1200mm coating. The tent body is 75D polyester taffeta. The poles are made of aluminum, and the mesh is 40D polyester micromesh, the holes of which were able to keep out every single bug. The guidelines are regular short cord with an easy-to-use tensioner, and the stakes are your regular thin shepherd hook stakes, and the carry bag is made of polyester. For portability, the 2-person Stormbreak has a pack size of 20 by 7 by 6.5 inches. If you're packing the poles separate from the rest of the tent body, the pack length is about 17.8 inches. The carry bag has a small hand grip at one side, and the whole tent weighs about 6.3 pounds. Here's the breakdown of all the components of the tent, if you need it. For pros, I thought that this was incredibly affordable for a North Face tent. This is their least expensive tent. I paid $185 for it in 2024. I think it's now $200 in 2025, but still squarely in the budget range, so it's a very nice price tag. And of course, this also comes with North Face limited lifetime warranty. The North Face's waterproofing tends to be good, and this Stormbreak is no exception. It lasted 3 hours of heavy rain, no problem at all. I also really love that the doors have a huge opening, plus the zipping and door pockets are so user-friendly that you can get each door completely open and closed in just 3 to 4 seconds, tops. The peak height is quite high as well, plus it has not 2, not 3, but 4 poles supporting the inner tent. This gives the tent a super spacious feel inside, and it could fit 6-inch and even higher mattresses in the tent if you need to. On top of that, the vestibules are bigger than your average tent, so if you want a tent with loads of space, this is it. I also love that I had a lot of versatility with the vestibules with 5 different configurations, but here's where we get into the cons. Unfortunately, probably the biggest con is that the vestibule zippers are quite annoying, but it becomes less of a big deal if you don't mind having to use both hands to zip and unzip it. Please refer back to test 7 for more instructions on this. The second con is that there are no rainy day Rainfly vents in this tent. I expected at least 2 vents, like what an average tent would have. And also the weight of this tent is quite a bit heavier than the marketed specs, so obviously you're not going to be able to take this along for ultralight backpacking trips or something. But if these cons don't bother you much, then honestly this is one of the best budget tents I've ever used, and I would highly recommend it. I know this because I tested the Stormbreak against other similar tents. Check out this video on the screen to see how it went. I'll put it up when it's ready. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in that one.